Kadosh Boker Tov. We're continuing today on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a1. So if you remember, yesterday the last part of the Gemara is we were asking a question: does Rabbi Yehuda make a decree? Which means, does he make a decree that maybe you're going to come to eat from the food accidentally? Because if you remember, Shitat Rabbi Yehuda is that after Shat HaBi'ur, which means after the time that you were not allowed to eat the chametz, you had to burn the chametz, you're not allowed to do bedikat chametz anymore. Because if you do bedikat chametz, and then you find chametz, you might come to eat it. So the Gemara was asking, does Rabbi Yehuda decree that maybe you're going to come and you're going to eat from it? But we learned in the Mishnah, once the Korban HaOmer came, and it says, once they brought the Korban HaOmer, the second that they brought the Korban HaOmer, on the same day, you would go out to the marketplace in Yerushalayim, and you would see that it would be filled with all types of Chadash foods. Now remember, the concept of Chadash is that anything which was not only but planted, but if it's going to be, it has to be rooted, which means that if you're going to plant something, Erev Pesach, that's still going to be considered Chadash. It has to be planted and rooted, right, before Pesach. There's a whole question how long before Pesach, right? But that's the halacha. So now what happens is anything which is planted afterwards or anything which is going to be rooted afterwards, what's going to happen is it's considered Chadash. Now Chadash, you're not allowed to come and you're not allowed to eat Chadash. Okay? So, says the Gemara, but they were doing this, Shelo Birtzon Chachamim. This is Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 11a1. They were doing this not with the will of the Chachamim, which means Chachamim did not like this, that they used to finish the Korban HaOmer and come out, and all of a sudden all the marketplaces were filled with Chadash. These are the words that Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Birtzon Chachamim ayosim. They were doing it fine. Now the question is, right here, he says here, we didn't come and we didn't make a decree that all of a sudden, if you're going to start dealing with Chadash before the Kavat HaOmer, so therefore maybe you're going to eat it. But the question is, how could it be what? It's magic. They just finished the Korban HaOmer in the Bet HaMikdash, and right now when they finish bringing it, now it becomes permitted to eat Chadash. So now you're going to tell me that, 1 second, but I just left the Bet HaMikdash 1 minute late, and the all the marketplaces are filled with Chadash. How do they fill the marketplace? When did they fill it up? That means they already did everything. They forget about the harvesting. They already have it ready on the tables. But 1 second, but that means what? You're not going to make a decree that maybe you're going to come and you're going to eat from it? It was already done before. It was prepared before. What? Of course. Everything was done before. Everything was done before. But that means 1 second, but that means they were dealing with it, and we didn't make a decree that maybe they're going to come to eat from it. So answers the Gemara, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, Shane Chadash shemitoch shelo itarta lo ela lidei kituf hu zachur. Which means like this, the Yisur of Chadash is different. Why? Because when you permitted him to come and to reap the grains, right, like you do the entire year, you always prohibited him to do it in a normal fashion. He was only permitted to do it with a shinui. So the fact, that means when you're going to come and you're going to reap Chadash, you're not allowed to reap it in the normal fashion, the way that you do Yashan, or the way that you do all year round, right? It has to be done in a different way. So therefore, since it's going to be done in a different way, so therefore, it says over here, he remembers that it's a sur. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda doesn't make such a decree. Meaning, Rabbi Yehuda usually does make a decree that usually if something's prohibited for you now, we don't want you to start dealing with it. Because then what's going to happen is maybe you're going to come to eat it. So 1 second, if that's a general rule of Rabbi Yehuda that we do make such a decree, why by Chadash he said that they were doing it b'ritzon Chachamim? They were doing it with the will of the Chachamim, that they were able to put out the Chadash and they were able to do everything and there was no problem. Why? There should be a problem according to Rabbi Yehuda. Answers the Gemara, because you did a shinu. The shinui is that when you were reaping it, you weren't reaping it normally. You had to reap it in a certain fashion. And the fact that you had to reap it in a certain fashion, you remembered, 1 second, why am I doing a bishinu? Why am I doing it like this? I have to remember, it's Chadash. I'm not allowed to touch it. So therefore, I'm not going to come to eat it. So because of that, Rabbi Yehuda never made a gezerah. But in normal cases, he does make a gezerah. And therefore, what happens? And therefore, in the case of bedikat chametz, once it becomes the prohibition of chametz, I'm not allowed to do bedikat chametz. right? Why? Because maybe I'm going to eat it.
Can you just explain a little bit about the Chadash and the Yashan? What's the
So basically like this, the Torah tells you that you're not allowed to eat Chadash. You're only allowed to eat Yashan. It's a Torah. Okay? Yeah. We're talking about the Kemach. Yeah, we're talking about the Kemach. Okay? The flour. So now what happens is, what is this concept? So the concept is that anything that was planted and rooted before Pesach, okay, afterwards, once the Korban HaOmer is brought, it permits everything. And therefore, when you're going to reap everything, everything's perfect. Now, what happens is you have a technical problem.
If you plant in December,
you plant in December, January, February, doesn't matter. It's all good. Why? Well, you're talking about it, yeah, you're going to reap it and everything afterwards. So even you didn't have to do it December, January. I could do it 2 weeks before Pesach, right? And as long as I did it 2 weeks before Pesach and I planted it and it rooted in, so then there's no problem. There's no machloket. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 days? Whatever it is. But let's say just to make it simple, we don't want to.
Just on the case that we're talking about here is that in the markets there was already flour. So that means
exactly.
That they planted that, they took it, they are whatever.
No, so for example, it's like right now. Right now, right, in America, and America is one of the big places that you have it, in America and South America, because, for example, in Europe, there's usually not a problem of Chadash. Why is there not a problem of Chadash? Because of the weather. So what happens? There's only one season of planting, which is the winter crop. There's only winter crop. So it's before Pesach. So automatically, whatever crop that you get is always going to be Yashan, because since everything's winter crop, by the time it comes down, so that's why, for example, they always tell you, Italian pasta, get it without any problems. But why? It has to be made in Italy. That's, by the way, that's a big mistake some people make. Some of the people make a conception, they think, it's an Italian brand, there's no problem with Chadash. But then it says, made in USA. You understand? That's cheating. You understand? Why is that cheating? Because that means, that could still be,
it's just the branding.
It's just a branding, you understand? Right. But it has to be that it's made in Italian pasta. So anything which is made in Italy, France, that's why by the beginning, right? When I remember the beginning, I didn't even know what Yashan was. Chadash, Yashan. Why? In Israel, there's no problem of Chadash and Yashan because everything's Yashan. Everything's in Yashan. Right? Gibraltar and Europe, there's no problems. So where's the problem? In Toronto, right? And in America. Now the thing is, in Toronto, I still wasn't as smart. So if I didn't know about it. So if you think I knew what was Yashan, Chadash, I was a 17-year-old boy. I had no clue what was going on. I was brought up with Ashkenazim. And then that's it. And Ashkenazim, by the way, are lenient. So what happens? What happens is that, he doesn't cut anybody's slack. Yeah.
Okay. So before.
So what happens? So therefore now in America and in Canada, they have the spring crop, which is basically in July, August. In July, August, they also plant. And then what happens is they come and they start reaping. So therefore, that's why after Pesach, it doesn't start immediately, Chadash and Yashan. Why not? Very, very simple. Because right after Pesach, the Korban HaOmer, which is brought on the 16th. Nowadays, we don't have a Korban HaOmer. So instead of the Korban HaOmer, it's the 16th day, which that's when they used to bring the Korban HaOmer. So once it's the 16th day, automatically it cleanses all Chadash beforehand. That's why after Pesach, everything is permitted. Bon appetit, eat whatever that you want. Now what happens? You need them to have the spring crop. So they start planting and they start doing it, and then they start reaping it. Now by the time it gets to the markets, it's usually in the middle of August, September. And that's why whenever you get the Chadash and Yashan guide, you always get the papers and everything, and it's already written, okay, so the spring stock, it's the spring, it's on the shelves. It's going to start getting to the shelves on this date, on August 24th. And oats is going to be this date, and wheat is going to be this date, and this is going to be that date, because each one is a separate date. You understand all the different, when they're coming. Right. So therefore, what happens is that that's when it starts the concept of Chadash and Yashan. So for example, I could go until August without looking at anything, and I could eat anything that you want. Once it comes to August, September, then I'm going to have to start looking, okay, so oats already started. Or this, and then not only that, you look by company. Why? Because certain companies, right, they only use winter. For example, Publix flour, which is all-purpose, not all types of flours, right, but all-purpose flour. Or not only Publix, Gold Medal, or a lot of the all-purpose flours, they're usually always Yashan. Why is it usually always Yashan? Because the concept of the all-purpose was made in a certain way you always needed the older wheat, the older one, not the new one. You can't use the new one. It's not good for the all-purpose. So therefore, automatically, if I already know that it's all-purpose, usually it's always going to be yashan.
So just like if they plant something in July and they harvest it, whatever, in August, and they put it on the shelf, that's considered chadash.
That's considered chadash, and I'm not allowed to eat it until the next
So
Pesach.
But if they put it in December and they pick it up after Pesach,
there's no problem whatsoever. Because as long as it was rooted before Pesach, rooted, meaning that I planted it and it rooted. It had to take root.
But isn't July also before Pesach?
No, July is after Pesach.
No, then you have
No, but then you have to wait. Yeah, you have Rosh Hashanah,
So you have to wait
Sukkot.
until Rosh Hashanah.
No, you have to wait until the next Pesach. Again, what is the concept? The concept is that the Korban HaOmer has to see it to purify it. So therefore, comes a Korban HaOmer, I come and I take tallies. I want to take, okay, fine, let me see all, it's like year ends. Le'avdil elef avdelo, but it's year ends, right? What happens? Comes the January 1st, and whatever you made the past year, you close the books. Why? Your income is based upon December 31st. After December 31st, you close the books.
Okay.
So the exact same thing. The closing of the books is the 16th of Pesach, the 16th of Nisan, the second day of Pesach, Korban HaOmer.
Okay.
That day, I close the books. So I take a tally. I come and say, okay, everything that was planted plus rooted before Pesach, I'm allowed to come and I'm allowed to benefit from it. Why? That's considered yashan. Anything that was planted or was planted afterwards, or even if it was planted before, but it wasn't rooted, but it has to take roots.
Yeah.
So if it didn't take roots until then, it's next year's crop. So now it's like next year's salary. I don't put it in last year's salary, I put it in next year's salary. Okay? So that's the concept. The exact same thing. Basically, that's a cutoff. The cutoff is the second day of Pesach. That permits everything prior. So even if I'm going to reap it in August, it's still yashan because it was already planted and rooted before Pesach. Okay, but anything that was planted after that, doesn't matter when I'm gonna cut it down. It's always chadash until the next Pesach. So let's say, for example, I came and I reaped it in August, but I planted it in February.
Planted it in
February or March.
Yeah.
And then I reaped it in August, it's still yashan. Okay, why? Because the cutoff was on the second day of Pesach. Okay, fine. Next. Amale Abaye comes and he tells Rabba, Teinach b'shat ketifa, that is all good when you're going to come and you are doing the melacha of ketifa, which is basically reaping. Utchina ve'arkada mai kadelemim. But what are you going to say when you're actually grinding it or sifting it? Meaning like this, when do you do the shinui? Only when you're reaping it, when you're cutting it down. Because there you're not doing it in the normal way of doing it every single year, because you have to do it through kituf, which is basically you have to do it with your hand, right, by yad, right? So the question is, one second.
So if you're reaping it differently.
If you're reaping it differently, that makes sense. You remember. No, it's not that it's not considered chadash. You'll remember and you won't eat it because you know it's chadash. Meaning, what did we just say before? We just said before, Rabbi Yehuda usually does make a decree, maybe you're going to forget and you're going to eat it. Right? That's the general rule. Why by the chadash did he say that they were doing it with B'Rishon Chachamim?
That you don't do biur chametz in the...
And that's why right when you do biur chametz, you're not allowed to do b'dikat chametz anymore. Because if you would find the chametz, maybe you're going to eat it. Okay? So now, why is it that by chadash we didn't make such a decree? They used to finish Korban HaOmer, go outside of the Beit HaMikdash, and everything was full of chadash. What's going on? Why didn't he make a decree? Maybe you're going to eat it. Answers the Gemara, chadash is different. Why? You make yourself a reminder, a remembrance. When I come and I reap the chadash, I know that I'm reaping it differently. So I'm not going to come to eat it. So ask the Gemara, that's only good by reaping. What about the grinding it? What about sifting it? There you didn't do any shinui. So therefore, if you're the one reaping it, you're right. You made a tiskoret. You made yourself a reminder. It's chadash. I have to do it differently. So therefore, I'm not allowed to eat it. Okay, very good. But now I'm the guy coming later. I'm after the reaping it. I'm already in the kitchen and I'm grinding it. Or he's the one in the kitchen and he's now sifting it. How's he going to remember now?
My only question is if it's chadash and it's in the market, why do I have to remember not to eat it? It's already in the market.
No, but what happens is it's in the fields. It's not in the markets. It's in the fields. So now...
You said right after Pesach.
You're talking about in Pesach. Yeah.
So I'm supposed to reap it in a different way.
Exactly.
To remember not to eat it, but it's already in the market.
That's the Gemara's question. The Gemara is asking the heker, which is the recognition, the reminder, in order for me to stop me from eating it, is only in the reaping. Afterwards, right, there's no heker, meaning that the grinding process, the sifting process, the kneading process, the baking process, everything else is all the same. So how am I going to remember it by a byproduct? Like what you're asking, I'm already in the marketplace. How am I going to remember not to eat it? How am I going to remember? If I'm reaping it, you're right. Meaning if you're going to come and give me a heter that I'm allowed to reap early, it makes sense. Because they could tell you, listen, you know what? Everybody come. We're going to be bringing the Korban HaOmer. Everyone start reaping. But it's not the time that you're allowed to eat Chadash yet. Yeah, you're right, but you're reaping it differently. So you're going to remember. But what about everything else? And here you already have a byproduct. You already have the finished product in the thing. So how do you do that? So answers the Gemara. Halakashi, that's not a question. Tchina berechaya diyad gargada al gabe anafa. He says, no, you're right. Even the grinding had to be beshinui because you had to do it with a rechaim shel yad, which means with a mill, which is a hand mill. You couldn't do it with a water mill. And also the harkada, which is the sifting, also had to be done with a shinui. Al gabe hanafa, which means you had to turn it around upside down. And that means you had to do it the upside down way. So therefore the heker, which is the reminder, was in every process. Obviously, we're going to continue going. But so therefore you see from here, that's why. That means the reason why it was permitted, this entire concept of Chadash, was not only because in the reaping there was done a shinui, every step of the way there was a shinui. So therefore, you're always going to remember, 1 second, why do I have to do it this way? Daddy, why are you holding it upside down? Or mommy, usually mommy does it. Yeah, whatever. Why are you doing it upside down? It's Chadash, we're not allowed to eat it. I have to remember. Because if you're going to do it the normal way, you'll forget. And then you're going to come to eat it.
The only thing I don't understand is it's still in the market.
No, you're right. That's the end product. But basically, until here, right, what we're trying to say is that until that point, you always have a remembrance.
But isn't the end product, I'm reaping and I'm grinding all these things differently because I'm going to eventually buy it and eat it.
Exactly. You will eat it. But by the time I get there, I didn't eat it. Meaning because if it's already in the market, obviously I had to start dealing with it a day before. 2 days before, whatever it is, or even it could be a week before. So the week before, what did I do? I came and I reaped it, but I reaped it differently. So I know, why did I reap it differently? I'm not allowed to eat it. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to come and I'm going to start making it because I want to make a food. I'm not going to eat it. I'm not going to eat the wheat like that. So I come and now I'm going to start grinding, right? So you say, I have to do it differently. Again, I can't eat it. Okay, fine. After grinding it, I'm going to come and I'm going to sift it. Why? Again, remember, so basically every step of the way, they wanted you to do it differently to remind you, you're still not allowed to eat it. You're still not allowed to eat it. You're still not allowed to eat it. So by doing that, you're going to be okay. Because by the time you're going to be allowed to eat it, that's when they meant you're allowed to eat it. Which means that the end product, no, you are allowed to eat it after they brought the Korban HaOmer. The Korban HaOmer, you're allowed to eat it. So that's why the Korban HaOmer, you're allowed to eat it. Right? That's why. By the way, you should know, since you're allowed to eat it after Korban HaOmer, that's why there's an entire concept that sometimes people say that there's no such thing as bitul by Chadash. What does that mean? Usually there's a halakha of bitul. What does bitul mean? Whether batel berov, right, or in batel b'shishim. Whether it's going to be in 60, if it's going to be a liquid, or if it's going to be in dry, right, 1 and 2. So imagine right now I have a caterer, and he's going to come and he's going to bring me bread. Some bread was yashan, and some was chadash. Now after he's going to say, Rabbi, don't worry about it. It got all mixed up. I don't know which is which. Everything's asur. Why is everything asur? It's a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Davar sheyesh lo matirin means that anything which could become permitted later, I don't say that I'm allowed to eat it now, be asur, because I annulled it. Which means here, right? What happens is that this bread was asur, it's chadash. What happens? It gets mixed up. So usually I would say, right? Like for example, if it was a piece of pig, or not pig, it's recognizable. But let's say non-kosher meat that gets up with kosher meat, it's not recognizable. It's not recognizable. 1 and 2 is batel. That's it. I'm allowed to eat them. Bon appetit. Again, we spoke about it yesterday, 2 days ago. You're not allowed to eat all 3 in one shot. Or whatever. Okay, fine. Very good. Here, this bread, I have a heter for this bread. You know what the heter is? Put it in the freezer and wait until Pesach. After Pesach, I'm allowed to eat it. So therefore, I'm not allowed to say echad bitre batel. So if I've got 1 piece of bread and another 2 pieces of bread, 2 are heter and 1 of them is chadash, I don't say batel.
Which means something that is never permissible for us. It goes into the batel concept.
Exactly.
But something that could be eventually.
And what's the svara? What's the logic? Very simple. Why are you going to eat it bisur if you could eat it betel? Meaning, when you had this piece of non-kosher meat, when you had this non-kosher meat getting mixed up with the other two pieces of kosher meat, you will never be able to permit it. So it's either you say bitul or kaddish, throw all three out. Now, bal tashchit, what? You're going to throw everything out? You can never become permitted. You can't make the chazir kosher. You understand? It doesn't exist. Because of the situation. Right? So because of the situation. But here, anyway, it's going to become kosher. So the fact that it's going to become kosher, so just wait.
So basically, the fact that you're harvesting differently, grinding differently, is because you're just, it's a reminder to supervise this production.
That you're not going to come to eat it.
From the other production, if you hold it until this date, you can eat it at that date.
Exactly.
Okay,
very good. So it says the Gemara, Elahad Itram, but that which we learned in the Mishnah, Kotzrin beta shlachim v'sheba makim. It says here, you're allowed to reap the grains in the beta shlachim. Beta shlachim is a field which does not get enough rainwater. So therefore, beta shlachim, you have to actually water it yourself. Meaning that it doesn't get enough rainwater, you have to water it. Even by plants, it's the same thing. Some plants, you plant a plant, right? Like, the cherry and all the other ones. And what happens? That's it. You forget about it. You don't have to worry about it, right? There is rain, not rain, but the rain is already enough. Other ones, for example, podocarpus, right? I learned the hard way. Yeah, what do? It's got incredible roots, but what happens? You have to plant it. You have to water it. If you don't water it, kaddish. Yeah, they die out. The rain is not enough. You have to add. You need additives. So the same thing. The beta shachim was not enough, just the rainwater. You needed to add water. So it says here, you're allowed to reap the grain which is in the beta shlachim or in the makim, right? Which are like the how do you call them? The emek, the valleys. Thank you. Right before the akravata omer, before the bringing of the omer, right, in the normal way. Avalo godshin, but you're not allowed to come and you're not allowed to bundle it together before the time of the omer. Ve'ukimna ki Rabbi Yehuda. And this is actually in accordance to Rabbi Yehuda. So, Michael Emema. What was, again, one more time, what did we just say? How do we start off the Gemara? We started the Gemara by saying, Rabbi Yehuda says that after the 6th hour, which means that after you're not allowed to anymore come and do the chametz, right, the biur chametz, you're not allowed to do bedikat chametz. Why not? Maybe I'm going to come to eat it. And that's a general rule. So we asked the question, Korban Omen, Chadash, right there, he used to come out and everything was filled. So what do we answer? Chadash was different. Why? They reaped it differently. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? Here it says the reaping was done in the normal way. It's true, it was only the reaping of the beta shachim and the makim, but the reaping was done in the normal way, right? But the piling together was done in a different way. Meaning reaping was done in the normal reaping. But then afterwards, the way that they piled together was not the normal way. So it says over here, that means they weren't able to reap it, not reap it, they weren't able to put it together, right, before the Korban HaOmer. So the Gemara is going to ask, right? If it's like that, who is that? That's Rabbi Yehuda. So it means, what are you telling me that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to reap it in the not normal way? Here it's saying that you reap it in the normal way. Yeah? Here, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're reaping it in the normal way. So how did you answer to me that Chadash was different, that he never made such a decree because you reap it in it differently? Here you're reaping it normally, and this is Rabbi Yehuda. So answers the Gemara, Ela Amar Abaye. Abaye answers you a completely different answer. You know why Chadash is different? Chadash bedil mineh. Chametz lo bedil mineh. There's a very famous concept. Chadash, you never eat. You're always careful not to eat Chadash. So since you're always careful not to eat Chadash, so therefore, even if you do it in the normal way, we're still not going to make a decree they're going to eat it. Because you already know, Chadash is Chadash. You don't touch Chadash. Chametz, you eat all year round. So therefore, the fact that you eat all year round, if you're going to come and you're going to have Chametz 2 hours after the Biur Chametz, a person doesn't separate himself from Chametz because he eats it 350 days a year, whatever it is. So therefore, what happens is that we're going to suspect maybe you're going to come to eat it. So that's the difference between Chadash and Chametz. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we always make a decree. The time it's Asur, maybe you're going to come to eat it, so it's Asur. However, though, Chadash is different. What's Chadash different? Because you always separate yourself from Chadash. You will never touch Chadash. So since you'll never touch Chadash, we're not going to make such a suspicion and such a decree. That's Shitat Rabbi Yehuda. So as the Gemara, Amar Rava, Rava comes and he says, the Rabbi Yehuda, Kashya. The Rabbanan, la Kashya. What? Are you only going to tell me that there's only a question between the concept of Chadash, between Rabbi Yehuda, and not between Rabbanan and Rabbanan? Right? Why? What was that Chachamim in Chadash? They said, right, that what? What did Chachamim say? Because remember, they said right? Birtzon chachamim, it says over there, v'hatra mishikra v'omiyotzim mizuvah, right? He says, shelo birtzon chachamim. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. So here, what are we trying to say? It says over here like this. In the Mishnah, we said that according to Rabbi Meir, this was done shelo birtzon chachamim, correct?
What was that?
Meaning that the fact that they came out of the Korban HaOmer and they found all the shuks in Yerushalayim filled of bread, they were not okay with it, according to Rabbi Meir.
But he said because of the different reaping, it's okay.
That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, but there's Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir comes and he says they were doing it shelo birtzon chachamim, which means, were they doing it? Yes. The rabbis weren't happy. Sometimes people come and they do things, but you're going to ask the rabbis, are you happy with that? The answer is no. But sometimes they just let it go by. Why? For many reasons. Sometimes either they're not going to listen. Sometimes it's better that they're shogeg and no mezid. There's certain reasons. Sometimes the rabbis just turn a blind eye. You understand? But according to Rabbi Yehuda, he said, no. They were doing it with the blessing of the rabbi. The rabbis were blessing them. They're saying, yeah, bechavod, do it. So we come and the Gemara is asking, 1 second, why are you only asking a contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda from Chametz and Rabbi Yehuda from Chadash. What about the Chachamim? Which is here, it's going to be Rabbi Meir. What? There's no contradiction. By Chametz, Rabbi Meir comes, or the rabbis tell you, you're allowed to do b'dikat Chametz until Shekiah, until sunset. And 1 second, by Chadash, what did they say? They didn't do it. They didn't do it. It's on Chachamim. They didn't do it. The rabbi's blessings. So therefore, what? There's no stira there. Why are you only asking contradiction, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda? What? There's no contradiction in Chachamim and Chachamim? So says the Gemara, you're right. Ela Amar Rava. Rava says, the Rabbi Yehuda la kashya. It's not a question Rabbi Yehuda to Rabbi Yehuda, just like we said. So we already answered it. We answered it that there's no, that means the difference between Chadash and Chametz, that's the difference. Chadash people, they always separate themselves, meaning that half the year you're separating yourself from Chadash. Right? Well, think about it. You're already starting from August or September, right? So if you're only doing, whether it's going to be also, that's already before Elul. So talking about the middle of Av, Elul, Tishri, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, until you get to Nisan. We're talking about like 6 months, 7 months. The majority of the year. Think about it. The majority of the year, right? We're talking about more than 6 months, right? At least half of the year, right? Because it's already from Rosh Hashanah to Pesach is half the year, 6 months. So you're talking about more than 6 months, more than half the year, you're separating yourself from Chadash. So therefore, you're not going to do that. But Chametz, what? 8 days, you're not eating Chametz. 7 days, 8 days is a chutzah. It's 7 days in Eretz Yisrael. So for 7 days of the year, you have another 350 days or whatever it is, right? That you're eating chametz. So obviously so there's a big difference. Okay, that's the answer of Rabbi Yehuda. What about the rabbis? Why? I don't understand you. It's an opposite logic. It's reverse psychology. Why? You're coming and you're looking for chametz. Why are you looking for chametz? I'm going to ask you right now. You're doing Medikat Chametz, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Why are you doing Medikat Chametz? To burn it. So now what? Now you found it. Now you're going to eat it? Saying it doesn't make sense. Saying if it's a normal scenario, right, and you find Chametz, maybe you could eat it. Why? Because you found a good piece of donut or you found a good chocolate bar that has Chametz on Pesach, and usually you don't segregate yourself from Chametz. So you're going to come on Pesach, you're going to eat it. I could understand. But if you yourself, you're doing B'dikat Chametz, and why are you doing B'dikat Chametz now? Because you forgot to do it last night. Now, what are you going to do with the Chametz that you find? You're going to burn it. So now what? We're going to suspect that now that you find it, now you're going to eat it and you're not going to burn it? Doesn't make sense. So that's how we answer the rabbis. That means the rabbis did not make a suspicion of eating it or doing anything because it doesn't make sense. If you're going to come and you're going to burn it, you're looking for it to burn it, now you're going to eat it. So that's why the rabbis permitted you to do B'dikat Chametz. But in the case of Chadash, the rabbis are not going to permit you to do that. Why? You're not looking for it to do anything bad. You want to eat it. You want to eat it. So if I'm going to permit you to come to the marketplaces and have Chadash early, they're going to say, Aywa, maybe you're going to come to eat it. You understand? Maybe you're going to come to eat it. So therefore, they don't permit you. Okay? Rav Ashi comes and he says another answer. The Rabbi Yehuda la kashya, kemach vekalitnan. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says that the entire concept of Chadash is not a stira to Chametz, because when we were talking about the Mishnah to do with Chadash, we were talking about not the end product. We were talking about kemach vekali. We were talking about flour, right, and the toasted and the like the things which are toasted like kernels. What does that mean? the Mishnah Menachot was talking about that you're dealing with the Chadash before the Korban HaOmer is only talking about Kemach Lekali, which are not fitting to eat the way that it is. So therefore, since you're not going to eat it that way, that's why he never made such a decree. But the end product, for sure, he would make a decree. So that's another answer now, which means like this. One more time. Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to come out in the marketplace, meaning you're allowed to come out on the 16th of Nisan. He's a Kohen. They just finished doing Korban HaOmer. He comes outside of the Bet HaMikdash, and all of a sudden he says, wow, I've got my Dunkin' is not right, but I've got my good donuts. Yeah, now 1 second. It's Chadash. No, the rabbi's permitted. What the rabbi's permitted? I just finished doing the Korban HaOmer 5 minutes ago. What, in 5 minutes I reaped, I grinded, I sifted, I kneaded, I baked. Well, in 5 minutes I did the entire thing. What is this? How do I do that? No, we did it before. Well, maybe you were going to eat from it. So says the Gemara, no. Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah that permits in Rabbi Yehuda that you're allowed to do these things is only in Kemach Bekali, in a not finished product. So therefore, since it's a not finished product, you're not going to start eating flour. So since you're not going to start eating flour, that's why Rabbi Yehuda said you're not going to eat it. And that's why you're allowed to deal with it, even though the Korban HaOmer was still not brought. But the finished product, he never permitted you to do that. Are you crazy? You're going to take the finished product? For sure not. If I'm going to take a donut, right, I'm going to eat it. So there, no. I'm going to take the flour, right, the kemach, that yes, that I'm allowed to. I'm not going to suspect you're going to start eating flour. So that's how we answer up Rabbi Yehuda. So there's no seed on Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda by us suspects that you're going to eat from the chametz because it's after the time of the Yisur. During the Chadash, it's also the time of the Yisur. Yeah, but you can't eat it. It's not fitting for consumption. It's not a finished product.
How long after Pesach did they have to hold it?
The what? No, right after Pesach, the second day of Pesach, it's permitted. Everything's permitted. Everything becomes permitted. Yeah. You understand? Okay. Yeah, everyone understood?
How long after Pesach? Right after Pesach? They were allowed
the day after Pesach. Obviously, there's a problem of Yom Tov, obviously. You understand? But I'm saying, but technically speaking, mitzad halacha, the day after Pesach, you're allowed to. Right? It was Chol HaMoed, correct? Remember that on the 16th of Nisan was Chol HaMoed. For us, it's the second day of Pesach because we do 2 days of Yom Tov. But for them, it was Chol HaMoed. On Chol HaMoed, they wanted to make bread. So they were able to come, they would reap, they would do all these things, and then they were able to make matzah. They were making matzah. Obviously, it wasn't it's Pesach. They're not allowed to make the thing. Okay?
technically speaking.
Amen.
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 Yeah. Technically speaking, it's chametz. Okay? Yeah.
Amen.
1 second, okay? Let's continue. So says the Gemara, okay, as follows. Rav Ashi comes and he says, so says the Gemara, 1 second. Had Rav Ashi bedutahi? He says this explanation in Rav Ashi is not true. Why? I understand the answer of Rav Ashi is going to be good in order to understand why you're allowed to come to deal with the Tvuah Chadashah from that hour, from the Keli, right, and onwards, right? But then it's not going to be fitting for eating. But Meikara ad Kali, remember, at the beginning until then, it was fitting to eat, which means you already took me to the middle product. I could have eaten it raw the way that it is. Okay? You could eat raw. What happens is I come and I start making it the middle product. In the middle, now it's not fitting for consumption anymore. But until then, you had a problem. Because if you're doing everything normally, so then why is it that I'm not going to suspect that you're going to come and you're going to eat it? Okay? Everyone understood the question. One more time. Basically, what's happening is that what are we saying? We're saying that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no problem because of the middle product. Okay? Because basically, you're never going to eat it. Okay? But he says, 1 second, you're not going to eat it when it's kemach and kali. What about before kemach and kali? You could have eaten it. So if you could have eaten it, it's not a good answer. Because we just said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're reaping it normally. So if you're reaping it normally, maybe you're going to come to eat it. You're right. As flour, you're not going to eat raw flour. But beforehand, maybe you would have eaten it. If you're going to tell me that again, you're doing a shinui, you're doing a changing in the way that you're reaping it. Kederaba like Rabba. Ella but rather, But this was a Braita Mefurashet. And the Braita says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're allowed to reap normally. You're not reaping it in a shinui. So therefore, what are you going to answer? That means this answer that you gave me is not a good answer. Because what did you try to answer? You tried to answer, no. In the marketplace, it was in the marketplace, but it was not an edible form in the marketplace. And that's why it was okay. So Rabbi Yehuda never made a decree. That's not true. What about beginning? How did it get to that stage? To get to the stage of flour, you had to do other processes. There in those processes, they were edible. Right? They were edible. Maybe it's not normal or whatever, but I'm saying they're edible. People eat raw, wheat or things like that. Say wheat, you eat wheat. Before making it into flour, you eat it, right? Whether it's raw, not raw, or you're going to cook it, you're going to peel it, but you toast it, whatever. But I'm saying, but until then, you're going to do it. So says the Gemara, Ella de Ravashi Meduta. You're right. Ravashi is off. You have to take it away, right? It's not a good answer. That means this answer, Ravashi, is not a good answer. Okay. So says the Gemara. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you're not going to separate yourself from it, Rabbi Yehuda makes a decree. What did we just say? The answer, one of the answers that we just answered before was, there's a huge difference between Chadash and Chametz. Chadash, you always separate yourself from it. Chametz, no. Okay, that was the answer, right? And therefore, we made a decree by Chametz, but not by Chadash. Chadash, you're allowed to, because you already know, I'm not allowed to eat it. Chametz, you eat chametz every single day. So because of that, you don't separate yourself. So it says the Gemara, and any place where you don't separate yourself, Rabbi Yehuda comes and he makes a decree. It says, V'atnam, we learned on the Mishnah on Shabbat, Lo yikov adam shefoferet shel betza, yimalena shemen, yitenena betzad haner, yishishete menatefet. So you're not allowed to come and you're not allowed to make a hole in a shoferet, which is basically a klipa, right, of the betza. So imagine I have an eggshell, I make a hole, and I'm not allowed to come and fill it with oil. And then I'm going to put it, right, betzad haner, above it. Why? In order that the oil should come and drip down. I think I actually even have a picture. Let me just check, because somebody sent me pictures this morning, but I don't remember if it was about this. Something like this. Okay, here obviously it's not an eggshell, but it's something very similar, right? Pretend that circle is like an eggshell. Okay?
But they're talking about eggshell, but in the egg there is no oil.
No, you're right. You cracked an egg. Yeah, what you did was, right, you made a little hole. You took out everything of the egg. You put oil inside. And then what you did is that you put it on top of a candle, and now drip, it's dripping inside of the candle. So you're not allowed to do that. That's what we just said. Lo yikov adam shefoferet shel beitza. This we say mamem leki. Yeah, you have to learn it. Yeah. So Friday night. Yeah. So what does that mean? You're not allowed to make a hole on erev Shabbat in the klipa of the beitza. Shoferet here is the beitza, is the klipa of the beitza. Shoferet usually is a tube, right? But here it means the klipa of the beitza. Himalena shemen. You're not allowed to fill it up with oil. Itenena betzad haner, to place it on top of the candle. That's what it says here, milamala, above it. In order that it's going to go tipa tipa. Minatefet tipa. Yeah, that's the word. What? No, we say minatefet. Metaftefet. Okay, fine. We're talking about the Mishnah. The Mishnah was with minatefet, right? So it says here, so it goes tipa achar tipa inside. For example, the bet kibul of the ner is only mechil me'at shemen. So that means the receptacle of the candle only holds a very small amount of oil. Now you want the candle should light for a very long time. So how are you going to do it? So very simple. I made a mechanism that I have the egg on the top. It's dripping, but drip by drip, right? Drip, and that's giving me my oil or my gasoline, right? In order that it should continue going. It should continue lit. So that's what I'm doing. Va'afilu, I'm not allowed to do that. Va'afilu hi shel cheres. Even if the shvoferet that I placed there was not from an eggshell, it was made out of cheres, which is disgusting. Still, I'm going to suspect maybe you're going to take from the oil and you're going to eat it. Meaning, what was the reason why I'm not allowed to do this? Because maybe I'm going to use this oil. So now, using oil from the eggshell, for sure I could do that. Why could I do that? Because what's happening is that, right, if I'm going to come, it's a gezerah basically. I'm making a gezerah. Maybe I'm going to come on Shabbat. I'm going to take from this shemen, which is inside for achila, and then I'm going to be aware on mechabeh. What is mechabeh? I just made a mechanism of having gasoline come into my candle for the entire Shabbat, or for the next 10 hours, okay? If I come and I take away that oil, what did I just do? I turned off the candle. Why? Because the second I take away the candle, the second I take away the oil, there's no more oil coming to the candle. After a few minutes, it's going to turn off. I just did mechabeh. Mechabeh means I'm not allowed to turn off a fire on Shabbat. I just did mechabeh. So now says the Gemara, not only if it's going to be by an eggshell, even if it's going to be what? Even if it's going to be a case of cheres, which is earthenware, which means that the oil became disgusting. I still suspect that I will come and take away from that oil. And then it's going to be a sur. Rabbi Yehuda matir. Rabbi Yehuda permits, whether we're talking about of a cheres or of a beitza, there's no problem. We're not going to have such a suspicion. So you see from here, shemen is something that people don't separate themselves. People eat oil all year round. And still, Rabbi Yehuda did not make such an isur. So you see from here, you made a hanacha mut'et. You know what hanacha mut'et means? You made a wrong assumption. Your assumption is that Rabbi Yehuda always makes a decree when people do not segregate themselves from something. So for example, chametz. People eat chametz all year round. People eat chametz all year round. You have to make a decree. Asur. Here, people eat oil all year round. So then why is it going to be that Rabbi Yehuda argues and he permits you to use this oil? Not to use oil, to put the oil in everything, right? But maybe you're going to take the oil and then you're going to be over on Mishum Mechabeh. And we didn't make such a decree according to Rabbi Yehuda Matir. But Rabbi Yehuda Matir, right? He says it's mutar.
This all goes back to the additional Begita.
Yes. It's all going back because again, one more time, we had a hanacha that according to Rabbi Yehuda, why is it that after the biur chametz, we're going to come and say that you're not allowed to do b'dikat chametz? Because if in case you find it, you're going to eat it. We don't make the same decree by chadash. Chadash, you always separate yourself. Chametz, you never separate yourself. So therefore, you're not allowed to do it. So it says the Gemara, whenever you don't separate yourself, you have to come and you have to make a decree. Meaning chametz, you don't separate yourself, so you have to make a decree. What about this? Yeah? So says the Gemara, right? So says the Gemara, okay. So says the Gemara as follows. Says the Gemara, Verami de Shabbat Shabbat. Answers the Gemara, Hata mishum chumra de Shabbat mivdir bedile. A very simple answer. It's Shabbat. On Shabbat, you already separate yourself because of the Yisur of Shabbat. Amen. So because you already separated yourself because of Shabbat, that's why we said that there's no problem. Amen. You understood? One more time. It's
not because of the product,
because of Shabbat. It's not because of the product. There was a product. Amen. What was the product? Chadash. I separate myself. Here, it's not the product. Oil you will eat all year round. Amen. It's because of Shabbat. That's why you separate yourself. So because of that, that's why you're saying this. No, because on Shabbat, you're not allowed to take from this oil, because if you take from this oil, you're going to be a chayav mishum Shabbat. You just were mechalel Shabbat.
So he was matir
because you do separate yourself. Why do you separate yourself? Because of Shabbat, not because of the food. You're right. There's food, you don't separate yourself. Because of the Shabbat. That's why you separate yourself. So Virami the Shabbat to the Shabbat. So we're going to ask a contradiction from Shabbat to Shabbat. Says the Tanya was learned on a Braita, right? Chevel dri shenifsak lo yeh koshro ela onvo. If you have a chevel dri, you had a bucket and it broke. Yeah, the rope tying to the bucket, you're putting it in a well, it broke. So you're not allowed to tie it because you're not allowed to make a kesher shel kaima. You're not allowed to make a knot on Shabbat. Ela onvo, you have to make a kesher aniva. Remember, kesher aniva is like a bow knot, right? That means it's not a real, what? Yeah, bow knot. Yeah, it's not a real knot. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it's not a kesher shel kaima. It's some, shoelaces, right? So it says, Rabbi Yehuda says, korech alav punda upiskia, you're allowed to put on the two parts like a chagura. It's like you're tying it with things that you usually use for the garbaim. Okay, ubilvad shelo yanvenu, but you're not allowed to make a kesher aniva. So you see from here, Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says that you're not allowed to make a kesher aniva on Shabbat. Why? Maybe you're going to make a regular kesher on Shabbat. Okay, so now the contradiction that we're asking is, I thought you just told me that according to Rabbi Yehuda, because of the chumrah of Shabbat, since Shabbat is so strict in your eyes, you're never going to be mechalel Shabbat. So that's why we didn't make any decrees. Here, Rabbi Yehuda just made a decree. He told you you're not allowed to make a kesher aniva on Shabbat. Why? Because maybe you're going to make a regular kesher on Shabbat. But that means you do make a decree. That means that's a contradiction, Rabbi Yehuda, from Shabbat to Shabbat. You just told me that because of Shabbat, you're not going to come and you're not going to take from the oil. Why? Because you segregate yourself from it because of the Shabbat, not because of the oil. The oil you eat every single day of the year. It's because of the Shabbat. Here, you're not allowed to make a kesher aniva. Why not? Maybe you're going to make a regular kesher. What's going on? So says the Gemara, Kasha de Rabbi Yehuda de Rabbi Yehuda, Kasha de Rabbanan de Rabbanan. So here, right, this is a question then, according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, right, to do with making the kesher. And it's a Kasha de Rabbanan de Rabbanan because to do with that they prohibited you to make the shoferet shel beitzah. So we have basically a contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, and a contradiction between Chachamim and Chachamim. Chachamim came and they said you're not allowed to make this egg type of mechanism for the oil. You're not allowed to. And by us, they said you're allowed to come and you're allowed to do b'dikat chametz erev Shabbat. No problem. So it's a stira, rabbis and rabbis, right? Erev Chag, right? And then there's a stira also between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, because he says that erev Chag, after the time of Yud Chametz, you're not allowed to do b'dikat chametz. And here he's saying that you're not allowed to make, right? So we thought that the answer there was because you're going to come to eat it. Chadash, you're not going to come to eat it, right? So he said, 1 second, what about on Ilchot Shabbat? There we said that you're allowed to come and you're allowed to make this beitzah. Why? No, stringency of Shabbat. Yeah, but what about here? Here you didn't say the stringency of Shabbat. Here you said you're not allowed to make a kesher aniva. Why? Because maybe you're going to make a kesher shekayma. So answers the Gemara, the Rabbanan l'kashya. According to Rabbanan, there's not a question why. Shemen b'shemen michlaf. The shemen in the shoferet is not any different than the shemen that you use all year round. Meaning, according to the rabbis, they said, why are you not allowed to make this mechanism of oil to pour into the candle? Very simple. It's all oil, and it's the exact same oil. So since it's all this exact same oil, people are going to think, what's the difference between this oil and the other oil? Same thing. So I'm going to come and I'm going to use oil. Maybe I won't use the entire oil, but I'll use part of it. But then I'm a over mechabeh. I just turned off the candle. So it's asur. So he says, however, though, aniva b'kshira lo michlaf. The fact that I'm going to make a kesher aniva is not the same as regular knot. It's a bow knot. So it's different. So the fact that it's different, I'm not going to change. I mean, the fact that the rabbis permitted you to make a kesher aniva, they didn't suspect that because I permitted you kesher aniva, now you're going to come, you're going to do a regular kesher shekayma, regular kesher. We don't suspect that.
Basically, if you use a little bit of the oil, you're reducing the time of...
And that's also asur. That's also mechabeh. It's mishum mechabeh.
So if you're using the oil for a salad or for something...
It's going to become asur. Exactly, mishum mechabeh. And that's why it's asur. That's why it's asur.
The kesher?
The kesher, I'm not going to get confused between a kesher aniva and a kesher shel kayama. Meaning the fact that the rabbi said you're allowed to make a kesher aniva. Remember, you have this bucket with this thing, and it broke. So you're allowed to come and make a kesher aniva. Why are you allowed to make a kesher aniva? Not because I permitted you to do a kesher aniva. I'm going to come and I'm going to do a regular kesher. Regular kesher is a sur. Kesher aniva is permitted. And I'm not going to get them confused. I know I'm only allowed to make a kesher aniva. Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rabbi Yehuda the kashya. Tamad Rabbi Yehuda, the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda is lam mishum the gezerah aniva to kashya. It's not because they made a gezerah aniva because of kashira. Ela mishum de kasavar aniva gufa kshirai. It wasn't a decree. We made a mistake. We thought that Rabbi Yehuda made a decree that on Shabbat you're not allowed to make a kesher aniva just in case you're going to make a kesher shekayma. Says the Gemara, no, it's not a decree. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a kesher aniva is a regular kesher. And therefore, since it is a regular kesher, that's why you're not allowed to make a kesher aniva. He's not making a decree. That in itself is already a sur. Meaning, if somebody's going to ask you, am I allowed to tie my shoelaces on Shabbat? I'm going to tell him, according to Rabbi Yehuda, your shoelace knot is a regular knot. You are over an isur doraita of kosher. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, that is a knot. According to rabbis, no. You're allowed to make a kesher shel aniva. I'm not going to suspect whether you're going to do it. Okay? So says the Gemara, okay, v'rami rabbanan de rabbanan. And we're going to ask another contradiction, rabbanan and rabbanan. Right? The Tanam was we learned in the Mishnah, koshrin dli bepiskia, aval lo bechever. But Rabbi Yehuda matid, it says you're allowed to tie the dli, this bucket, with a piskia, with this thing that usually, why? Because it's not a real knot. I don't know how you translate piskia in English, but it's basically, what does it say there?
Pail.
No, the pail is the bucket, the dli. A garter, that's what it is. I don't know what that is exactly, but it's basically something, it's not a real, right, knot. Yeah. Avalo bechever, but not with the rope. Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to. So chever, what type of rope are we talking about? If you're going to tell me a regular rope, and Rabbi Yehuda says that it's permitted, kesher shekayama, yeah, kesher shekayama hu tevadai ati lebetule. He says what? It's a kesher shekayama. For sure, it's going to come and it's going to become batel. right? What does that mean? According to Rabbi Yehuda, how could it be that Rabbi Yehuda is going to be matir? It's a kesher shekayama. So therefore, since it's kesher shekayama, what's going on? Ela pshita de garde, right? 1 second, okay? So let's continue. So the Gemara says, the Rabbanan also was, what type of a chevel are we talking about? If you're talking about a regular chevel, a regular rope, Rabbi Yehuda matir and Rabbi Yehuda permits it, hare kesher shekayama, it's a kesher shekayama, but for sure you're going to come levatule. Levatule means you're going to annul it and leave it there. So if you leave it there, that's called a kesher shekayama. What's the concept of a shoelace? Temporary, not temporary. If you're going to come and tie your shoelace once a year, that's not called a temporary knot. Even though you use the kesher sheniva, that's not called temporary. Ela pshita de garde. Obviously, we're talking about something which is a chevel shel orgim, right? And therefore, which means that it's not going to be there for a long time. So the rabbis made a decree, right, on a chevel de garde with a regular chevel, which means that they made a decree from one chevel to another chevel. So this is a stira because I thought that they said that they don't make a decree on aniva to kshira, meaning I have right now a knot. I'm not allowed to make a regular knot, but I'm allowed to make a bow knot. Why? Because from one kesher to another kesher aniva to kesher shel kayama, I don't make a mistake, right? And it's going to be permitted. Here you see from even one chevel to another chevel, we do make a mistake. That means we are going, so answers the Gemara, in yes, chevel bechevel michlaf. At the end of the day, it's a rope. So from one rope to another rope, the rabbis hold, you will make a mistake. But from aniva to kshira, lo michlefa, you're not going to do it. Meaning, if it's the same item, even if it's made out of a different material, but it's the same item, I'm going to make a decree that maybe behemet I'm going to get confused. But somebody's going to ask me, what's the difference between one rope and another? It's a rope. A rope's a rope. What do I care if it's made out of synthetic and polyester? It's all a rope. But when I'm making how to do it, which is the action, aniva and keshira is two different worlds. So therefore, I'm not going to make such a decree. There, I don't make such a decree. Okay? So again, we're going back to the same thing. In any place where you do segregate yourself, Logos Rabbi Yehuda didn't make a decree. Tanya, we learned in a Braita. Bechor she'achazo dam. Imagine a bechor behema. You have a bechor animal, she'achazo dam, that he gets sick, that he has too much blood. So what happens? Afilu hu met. They are doing it. Yeah. Okay, so he says over here. So it says over here, "En makizin lo dam." You're not allowed to take out blood, right? That means even though he could die from it, you don't bloodlet. Tiva Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Yehuda. You stay here. So it says over here, "Makizin lo dam." En makizin lo dam. We're not allowed to bloodlet the animal. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. An animal. So we have a bechor animal that he's sick. He's got too much blood. So it says you're not allowed to bloodlet. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim say you are allowed to bloodlet as long as you don't give him a mum, as long as you don't put him a blemish. Now, even though there is a possibility that there will be a mum, right? Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, asur. Why? Because maybe you're going to make him mum kavua. So therefore, you see from here, that means even though everybody is bedelim from kodshim, meaning everybody separates themselves from kodshim, because remember, it's kodshim. We're not allowed to use bechor bema. Bechor bema goes to the kohen. But still, says Rabbi Yehuda, it's asur. Why? I'm going to make a decree that maybe be'emet, I'm going to come and I'm going to make a mum or whatever it is, right? So he says over here, okay? So he says over here like this. It says over here, hatam over there, mitoch shadam bahul al mamono, there's Yudalef Amud Bet, 11b. Since a person's bahul al mamono, amrinan, we're going to say, sharit le, if you're going to permit him, mimkom shenosim bomum, which means like this. If you remember, Rabbi Mansour also explained this here when you remember. Some people, sometimes, not some people, the majority of people, when they're bahul al-mamono means when people know that they're going to lose money, they start going crazy, right? When is the real test for whether it could be, caterers, whether people, businessmen, are they going to be trustworthy and they're going to do everything 100% according to the halakha? When all of a sudden they become bahul al-mamono. Meaning in a normal scenario, people have their head on the shoulders. It's okay, hopefully they're doing the right things. When do you really test the yirat shamayim of a person? When a person, Exactly. Kiso, that's the keys, the pocket. What happens? All of a sudden, right, you get into a problem. So all of a sudden, what happens? Once you get into the problem, so now all of a sudden you come and you say to yourself, oh. So he says like this, when a person is bahul al-mamono, says Rabbi Yehuda, if I'm going to come and permit them to bloodlet, so usually where do you have to bloodlet? In a place where you don't make a mum. Here maybe you're going to bloodlet in a place where you do make a mum. Man. So that's why because of that it's prohibited. So and then exactly, then it's gonna be a problem. So because of that, that's why it's gonna be a problem. So he says, so comes Rabbi Yehuda and he says you're not allowed to do it. According to the rabbis, the opposite. According to the rabbis, they said kol sheken. If you're not going to permit him at all to come into bloodlet, then for sure he's going to do it beisur. Why? Because now he lost everything now. Now he completely lost it. So because of that, that's why he says that it's going to be permitted. So says the Gemara, do we say that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Adam bahulul mamano, the people, they actually go crazy about their money? The Tanam we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, you're not allowed to come and to comb, right? An animal on Yom Tov with a masrek shel barzel, with a comb, with a metal comb, with an iron comb, because it makes a chabura. Now remember, a chabura is an av melacha. If you make a blemish or you make a wound in someone, that's an av melacha on Shabbat, okay, or on Yom Tov. So it says avon mekartzefin, but you're allowed to do it with a masrek of etz, of wood. Why? Because it doesn't make a chabura. Chachamim say, you're not allowed to do anything. The Tanya we learned in the Braita, ezu kirud ve'ezu. What is the difference? Kirud ktanim v'osin chabura. Kirud is very, very small. So therefore they have like a shinaim dakot, meaning the teeth are very, very small. So for when you're combing it and it's very, very small, it makes an indent and it makes a chabura. Kartzuf are very big, meaning their teeth are big, and therefore they don't make a chabura. And they're separated, right? So therefore what happens is it says over here, so what happens is that even though a person is bahul on nikayom behemto, meaning a person, he wants to make sure that his animal is clean because he wants it to be healthy. Still, Rabbi Yehuda permits you to do it with a thing of etz, and we're not going to suspect that you're going to come now and use the wrong brush, right? We didn't suspect you that you're going to use a metal, an iron brush instead of the wood brush. So answers the Gemara, hatan di shavik lemait. Says, no, there, if you're going to leave the animal without doing anything, it's going to die. So Amrina, we say, Adam bahul mamano, that a person will become bahul mamano. Hacha here, by the case of this case, he says, ishavik if it's going to be tzarabian, it's only tzar. So lo amrina, meaning like this. In the case over here, what happened? The animal got dirty. So what are we saying? Are you allowed to come and comb it off? So there, if you would leave it, what's the worst case scenario? Okay, so it's suffering, but it's not going to die. So there, Adam lo bahul mamano. You're not going to go crazy about your money because okay, it's going to suffer a little bit. Come afterwards, boom, you take it out to the next day. Okay, it's suffering, but that's it. Here, if you leave the animal without taking out the blood, it's going to die. So there, a person is bahul al-mamno. So Rabbi Yehuda says the Gemara.
Between the masrek and the nim.
The masrek was that we don't make a decree, meaning we don't make a decree that you're not allowed to use a masrek shel etz. Maybe you're going to use a masrek shel barzel. Why not? Says the Gemara, because a person is not be'emet bahul al-mamno in such a case. Okay, but in the mum, yes. So therefore, that's why by the mum we did make a decree. Meaning by the mum we made a decree because of dam bahul al-mamno. Here the dam lo bahul al-mamno, so we don't make a decree. Exactly. Rabbi Yehuda ma'ishna gabe chametz the gazar, u'ma'ishna gabe kitzud gazar. And so what's the reasoning why Rabbi Yehuda made a gezerah by chametz and not by kitzuf? Which means why is it that by chametz he made a decree and he said you're not allowed to do b'dikat chametz after the proper time, but by the kitzuf he didn't make a decree. So answers the Gemara, lechem belechem michlaf, kirud bekitzuf lo michlaf. The same answer we answered before to Rabbanan, bread and bread, people will get confused. Which means the yisur, people will come and get confused, and therefore, bread is bread. All types of bread is all bread. However, though, kitzuf and kirud is a different type. It's both combing, man, but it's a different form of combing. So since it's a different form of combing, you're not going to get confused. Meaning the fact that Rabbi Yehuda permitted you to do with the wooden one, you're not going to get confused, and you're going to do it with the iron one. However, though, bread is bread. So if you're going to start doing the ikat chametz, maybe you're going to come to eat from it. Says the Mishnah, okay, Rabbi Meir says, Ochlim kol chamesh, you're allowed to eat until the end of the 5th hour into the day, v'sorfim b'tchilat shesh, and you have to burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, Ochlim kol arba, you're allowed to eat the entire 4th hour, v'tolin kol chamesh, and you wait the entire 5th hour, v'sorfim b'tchilat shesh, you burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. So basically there's a machloket, first of all, when are you allowed to eat chametz? Until when? And when do you burn the chametz? So according to everybody, you're burning the chametz b'tchilat shesh, correct? According to everybody. That's what we said. We said according to Rabbi Meir, v'sorfin b'tchilat shesh, and also according to Rabbi Yehuda, v'sorfin b'tchilat shesh. The machloka between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is when do you eat it? Because according to Rabbi Meir, you're allowed to eat it until the end of the 5th, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's only until the end of the 4th, and obviously that extra hour. So basically, srefat chametz is according to everybody at the same time. Biur chametz, which is the destroying of the chametz. The question is eating of it. Okay, that's a machloket. Next, Rabbi Yehuda also says, shte chalot shel toda psulot munachot al gav hayitzteba. When you have the korban toda, remember, you used to have, the korban toda always had 40 loaves of bread. And part of the 40 loaves of bread, 10 of them were chametz, because there were 4 groups of 10. Three groups of 10 were matzah, different forms of matzah, and 10 of them was chametz. Okay, so you had an entire group, which was all chametz. So says the Gemara, okay, when you have shte chalot of korban toda psulot, that they became psul, what does that mean? It says over here, they used to bring the 40 breads, 10 of them was, 10 of them is chametz, what I just told you.
There's 4 piles of 10.
Yes. Yeah. 4 piles of 10. Another total of 30 with matzah. And the different forms of matzah. So it says over here, when you have 2 of chametz, of the korban toda pesulot, that they were on Erev Pesach on top of the Itzteba. On top of the Itzteba, remember, Itzteba, we just learned it in Eruvin, that it was like a bench, right? And Itzteba is it's like a platform that you could sit down on top of it. Okay, so kol zman shemunachot kol ha'am ochlim. As long as it was there, everybody was allowed to eat chametz. Nitla achat, amen. The second that they took one, tolin, right? Lo ochlim lo sorfim. They don't eat, but they don't burn it. Nitlu shtehem, nitchilu kol ha'am sorfim. And these come. So basically, so what was the reason for this? It's a siman, meaning they had a siman all over in the Bet HaMikdash. They had 2 chalot. When the 2 chalot were there, you're still allowed to eat chametz. They took 1 challah away, you're not allowed to eat chametz anymore. But you don't have to burn it yet. They took the second one, now you have to burn it. Okay? Rabban Gamliel says, Chulin nechalin kol orba, regular food is eaten all the 4th until the end of the 4th hour. Truma kol chamesh, truma is until the end of the 5th hour. Vesorfim b'tchilat shesh, and then they burn at the beginning of the 6th hour, which means this is a dea shlishit. When is the yisur of achilat chametz on Erev Pesach? He says it all depends on which type of chametz it is. Is it chulin of chametz or truma of chametz? Okay? One's truma and one's chulin. Chulin is regular food. Truma, it has to go to the Kohen, but it's still chametz. So therefore, Rabbi Gamliel is a completely different shita. According to Rabbi Gamliel, depends what type of chametz it is. That's when you're allowed to eat it. Okay, so one more time. According to Rabbi Meir, you're allowed to eat chametz until the end of the 5th hour. You burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. According to Rabbi Yehuda, until the end of the 4th hour. The 5th hour is tolin, which means you don't do anything. The beginning of the 6th hour, you burn it. According to Rabbi Gamliel, it all depends. If it's chulin, until the end of the 4th hour. If it's truma, the end of the 5th hour. And then you burn it at the beginning of the 6th. So according to everybody, doesn't matter, the 3 opinions, you burn at the beginning of the 6th. According to everybody. Only machloket is the eating, or tolin at all or not, which means you wait at all. Says the Gemara, Tran Hatam, we learned over there, Echad omer bishnayim bechodesh, ve'echad omer bishlosha. Right? Imagine right now, this is a Mishnah Sanhedrin. We're talking about testimony. Imagine somebody comes and they said that this person, whether he killed someone else or whatever it is, so 2 people come to Bedin. One person says the guy murdered on the 2nd day of the month. The other witness says he murdered on the 3rd day of the month, right? So what happens? Edutan kayemet. It's still considered a good testimony. One of them knows when the month became, the leap year, meaning like the month of the 30 days and the 29, and one doesn't. That means basically a person could make a mistake on one day, especially at the beginning of the month, right? Even today, for example. Right, today's what? December 1st, 2nd, you don't remember. Was it 31 days, 30 days? You have to remember, no, January, February, March, November, it's 30. Oh, okay, so now I know November was 30, so it was December 1st. Sometimes you forget, even the watches many times, it says 1st, right? Today's the 2nd. That means, people forget, it's not, I have to change it, you understand? That means people, they could get confused. So, okay, fine. Says the Gemara, אחד אומר בשלושה ואחד אומר בחמישה, עדותם בטלה, but not 2 days. Meaning, once it becomes 2 days of a discrepancy, it's too much. Why? Because you have to know that. You understand? So says the Gemara, אחד אומר, one of them says בשתי שעות ואחד אומר בשלוש. One of them says at 2 o'clock, and one of them says 3 o'clock. It's good testimony. אחד אומר בשלוש ואחד אומר בחמש, but one says 3 o'clock, one says 5 o'clock. Amen. בעדותם בטלה, it's going to be annulled. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says, it's still good. Amen. Why? Why? Because 2 hours in the day, you also, you can make a discrepancy. אחד אומר בחמש ואחד אומר בשבע. One of them says in the fifth hour, one of them says 7th hour, it's going to be batel. שבחמש, חמה במזרח, ושבע חמה במערב. Amen. That means according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to him, even though he argues on Rabbi Meir and he says 2 hours is still good, it's only if it's the same time period of the day. Meaning, let's say between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, or between 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock, or between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock. There, 2 hours is still okay. But between 5 and 7, 5 and 7, it's, the shkia time. Meaning, there's a difference. You can't tell me that it's the same. Meaning, people already know that. Okay? Amen. Amar Abai, Baruch Abai Abai says, כשתמצא לומר לדברי רבי מין אין אדם טועה ולא כלום, לדברי רבי יהודה אדם טועה חצי שעה. So it comes out that when you're going to be medaktek in the words of the Chachamim, the Tanaim, it comes out that according to Rabbi Meir, a person does not make a mistake whatsoever, right? Because Rabbi Meir said it's a betela, even if he said from 3 to 5. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, a person does make a mistake with a half an hour. So says the Gemara, what does that mean? לדברי רבי מאיר אין אדם טועה ולא כלום. מעשה, there was a story, Kiava. What was the story? במייפק תרתי ומעייל תלת. Right? It was coming out of the second hour and coming into the third hour. So when he said the second hour, it meant the end of the second hour. And that which he said the third, it means the beginning of the third hour. But according to Yehuda, a person makes a mistake in half an hour. Man, what was the story? Bepalga de arbava, man, it was like 4:30, meaning it was in the middle of the fourth hour. When he said 3, it's at the end of the third. He made a mistake in half an hour. And the one that said 5 was the beginning of the 5th hour. So he also made a mistake in half an hour. That means according to this shita, it's only a half an hour of discrepancy. Amen. It's not like literally like what it is. It's exactly, it's not a full hour. There are those that say, Abai says, when you're going to see, according to Rabbi Meir, Adam Toeh, Mashu, a person does make a mistake in something. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, Adam Toeh b'sha'ah Mashu. You can make a mistake in an hour in Mashu. What does that mean? We're going to explain again. According to Rabbi Meir, Adam Toeh b'Mashu, a person can make a mistake in Mashu. Masechta, what was this case? Or besof shtayim hava, or at the end of the second hour, or the beginning of the third. One of them is making a mistake, meaning it happened at the end of the second or the beginning of the third. So there's a few minutes discrepancy. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Adam Toeh b'sha'ah Mashu, right? Masechta, what was the case? The end of the third hour or the beginning of the 5th. So there was already 1 hour in the middle, but it was an hour and a little bit. So an hour and a little bit, a person could come and make a mistake. So now obviously tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, you bet we're going to ask a question on this explanation.